Hello, listeners. Welcome to Stars of the Golden Age, a show that highlights the lives of legends from film, music, and the birth of television during Hollywood's Golden Age, with a special emphasis on their lives behind the scenes. I am your host, Erin Carlson. Today, and for the next couple of weeks, we will be talking about the one and only Judy Garland. Today, I will tell you about Judy's childhood, which was a really fun journey for me because we're neighbors. All of the towns and places referenced within Judy Garland's early years are very familiar to me because I live amongst them. So it was really cool to be able to envision that Judy energy here in my own backyard. To envision all of the places described from the family's life in northern Minnesota. Because we love our northern Minnesota. And we love our Judy. For our journey through Judy Garland's story, I used what are considered the two premier biographies of her life. The book Get Happy, The Life of Judy Garland by Gerald Clarke, and the book Judy by Gerald Frank. 1,234 pages of pure greatness. And then I used a lot of amazing information I acquired at the Judy Garland Museum and Childhood Home in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. A remarkable place and a must-see for any Judy Garland fan. Thank you so much to all of those individuals for preserving Judy's story for us. Let's dive into the early life of Miss Judy Garland. Judy Garland was born as Frances Ethel Gumm to parents Francis or Frank and Ethel Gumm on June 10, 1922, in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. Judy, I'm going to refer to her as Judy throughout our story, even though she didn't take that name until a little bit down the road. Judy joined older sisters Mary Jane and Virginia to the family, who were just shy of 7 and 5 when she was born. Frank and Ethel hadn't intended on having any more children now that their girls were growing out of their early childhood years, and they were not exactly happy about discovering that they were expecting a third child. So, I'm sad to say, Judy Garland's life of trauma began before she was even born, when her mother made several dangerous at-home attempts to terminate her pregnancy. Even doctor-performed abortions were dangerous in those days, as infections often occurred. This was before antibiotics. Ethel tried on her own, and then the couple enlisted the help of a doctor friend. The doctor refused, and he refused to give them a referral to anyone else that could help them. He convinced Frank and Ethel to have the baby, and he knew they would love their child just as much as they loved their older children once she was born. Reluctantly, they went through with the pregnancy. But since they were expanding their family, they hoped for a boy. They were so certain that they would have a baby boy that they chose a name, Francis Jr. or Frank Jr. Ethel's due date came and went. It was 2 weeks after her due date that she went into labor and gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. Frank wouldn't do, but Francis would. They named her Frances Ethel Gumm. By her family throughout her childhood, though, she would never be called by her given name. To them, she was Baby. Judy Garland later said of her first days of life, quote, "I knew I wasn't wanted. And after 2 girls, I might at least have had the decency to be a boy. I wasn't primping, God knows. I was fighting not to be born. If I could have talked that morning, I would have said, 'Look, I object to you as much as you object to me.' But I had nothing to say, then or ever." End quote. Judy may not have been planned or celebrated before she was born, but the second she entered the world, Her entire family was head over heels in love with her. A frightening situation occurred when she was just over a year old and became very, very sick. She couldn't eat or drink, and she had a very high fever for days. The family's doctor told Frank and Ethel they might lose their daughter. She may not pull through. It got so bad one night that they knew she needed a bigger hospital. So they drove through a terrible snowstorm to Duluth, which today takes about an hour and a half, but would have taken much longer in the 1920s, especially when you factor in the snowstorm. They made it to St. Mary's Hospital in Duluth, which I actually used to work at before I became a teacher. They just tore down the very hospital Judy would have been treated at to build a new one about a year or two ago. Judy was very sick for a long time and stayed at St. Mary's for almost a month, losing a lot of weight that she didn't have to lose. She was just a toddler. Doctors didn't think she would survive. She was very sick. She finally recovered enough to return home to Grand Rapids, and their local doctor put her on a strict diet of whole fat milk, which he maintained saved her life. Her health would always remain very fragile throughout the remainder of her childhood. She had frequent ear infections that were very painful, and she had to eventually have her ears lanced, without anesthesia or any numbing agent. And all of these experiences left Judy with a lifelong fear of physical pain. Frank and Ethel Gum operated the local Grand Rapids Grand Theater. And Frank also worked for the local newspaper, the Weekly Independent, as a society reporter and advertisement salesman. Frank and Ethel were a beloved couple within the community. The theater was, at least. I read varying accounts of the community's reception of Frank and Ethel as people. Frank was both described as beloved and difficult with a temper. To his family, though, he was always fun and warm and loving. And Ethel was described as, quote, a plump, spirited woman just under 5 feet, with snapping black eyes that missed nothing, and brimming over with nervous energy, end quote. She was also described as hospitable and outgoing. Frank may have been beloved by some in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, but he wasn't beloved by all in Grand Rapids, or a few other towns that he passed through before settling in Grand Rapids. He was swiftly kicked out of at least 2 nearby towns for his inappropriate behavior towards local teenage boys. More on that in a bit. But with that secret part of his life unknown by the people of Grand Rapids at the time, it appears the Gums had a rich social life there. They had friends over often or would go to dinners at other homes, and bridge games were frequent and beloved. Running the Grand Theater was a family affair. The first of 2 movies each night showed at 7:00 p.m., and everyone had a job to do. Frank oversaw operations. He sold tickets, sold concessions, projected films, and offered music and stage entertainment. Ethel sold tickets before performing on the piano in the pit during films and during intermission. On Fridays, the girls provided some entertainment through song and dance. Ethel made all of their costumes. Frank and Ethel had met at the Princess Theater in Superior, Wisconsin. That building, I know, is still there. I drove by it not too long ago, actually. Frank and Ethel had traveled with their vaudeville act in the first months of their marriage before settling down in Grand Rapids and taking over the movie house. So entertainment was it for them. Their home was filled with music, and they wanted a professional life centered around entertaining others. There was nothing else for them. That was it. Judy Garland's stage debut was on January 1st, 1925, when she was 2 years old, as little baby Gum at the family theater. She had been admiring her older sister's performances on the theater stage during intermissions for her entire short life, as they had been performing as a sister act for a few years. She wanted to do what they were doing, but her parents kept telling the 2-year-old that she was too little. She finally got her chance that cold New Year's Day as they rang in the year 1925. She sang Jingle Bells as she rang a little bell, and her audience, of course, adored her. When her mother yell-whispered from the piano in the pit that it was time to get off the stage, Judy didn't want to get off the stage. She sang Jingle Bells again, and again, and again. A total of 5 times she sang Jingle Bells, unable to tear herself from that rush she was feeling for the first time. The rush of audience joy. Finally, her father had to walk on stage, laughing, and throw her over his shoulder to signal the end of her performance. Little 2-year-old Judy was hooked. Her next performance, her first official performance, was at a local women's fashion show. 2-year-old Judy Garland jumped out of a giant cake and danced the Charleston. Can you imagine how adorable that was? Also, nobody pops out of cakes anymore. I think we should bring that back. Now that little Judy was hooked on crowd applause, the Gum Sisters duo act became a trio. Judy's first years of life were very happy, very wholesome and happy. She always spoke fondly of her childhood years in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. The singing and dancing and piano and fun. The fun, carefree time she had with her family and friends. It was the ideal life, and she would later yearn for that ideal life again. I recently visited Judy's childhood home in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, and when I was there, I stood in the living room and I could just feel Judy with her sisters and her mother around the piano, or on the landing of the stairs where Judy and her sisters would put on little performances for their parents. I could feel her energy there. Those years spent at that home here in Minnesota were happy ones. Judy later recalled of her early childhood there, quote, "I do remember it was terribly happy, and possibly the only kind of normal, carefree time in my life." End quote. We get a lot of snow here in northern Minnesota. In fact, we just received a nice gift of over 2 feet of new snow in one day with a recent blizzard. You have to love snow if you live in a place like northern Minnesota. Otherwise, you'll be miserable for half the year. Judy and her sisters loved the snow, and they cherished the Christmas holidays they were able to spend at their home in Grand Rapids. They had a Christmas tradition every year where they would make sure nobody walked on the front yard for days before Christmas. So the yard would be a perfectly beautiful blanket of undisturbed snow. And then, on the evening of Christmas Eve, the whole family would go out in the front yard and make snow angels. Then they would rush upstairs to the front bedroom of the house and admire their artwork from above. They would cap off the night with hot cocoa. The Gums lived an idealistic life in northern Minnesota. It's a pretty magical place to live still today. Judy, the little girl her family didn't want, brought a life and energy into the Gum house that had been missing before. Her sisters doted on her, and her parents spoiled her rotten, especially her father. Frank was the soft parent, always playing with the girls and giving in to their every want, while Ethel was more of a disciplinarian. All in all, life was wonderful in those early years of Judy Garland's life. I wish the Gums would have stayed here in Minnesota, but they didn't. If they did, the world would have never had Judy Garland. That thought feels selfish, but if Frances Baby Gum never became Judy Garland, if she stayed in Minnesota in a life out of the spotlight, maybe her life would have been a lot easier and a lot happier. But the Gums did leave Minnesota in the summer of 1926, when Judy was 4 years old. They left for a few different reasons. One was Judy's health. She was constantly sick, and Frank and Ethel thought a more mild climate might be good for her. It gets really cold here. Frank also had some health issues that were aggravated by cold temperatures. Frank's behavior with teenage boys was another factor. The people of Grand Rapids were catching on to him. And then there was the Gum Sisters Act. Frank and Ethel's friend Mark, the doctor they had begged to help them with an abortion, had moved to Los Angeles and sang the praises of his new home and the vast opportunities within it, especially in entertainment. He promised to help the Gums search for a movie house that they could buy or rent in LA if they wanted to give it a shot. Then the theater could provide income while Ethel polished up the girls' act and searched for opportunities for them. It would begin as an extended summer-long vacation, and after performing their way across the United States and any small town they traveled through in order to make money, the family arrived in Los Angeles. And it didn't take long for them to decide they absolutely wanted to make a new life in warm California. The Los Angeles area was not starving for movie theaters in the mid-1920s. There were plenty to go around. And they were thriving, so nobody was willing to give up theirs to newcomer Frank Gum, who was in the market for a theater. He finally found one to lease about 60 miles north of LA in the small town of Lancaster. It was the Antelope Valley Theater, which he renamed the Valley Theater, and it sat an audience of 500, twice as big as the New Grand in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. One person who had probably sat in that theater many times was John Wayne. He spent a few years of his childhood in Lancaster. 60 miles is a long way away from the Hollywood film studios, though, and that's where Ethel had her eyes set for her talented daughters, and for herself if she could get a job within the studio somewhere. It was a good starting point, though. It wasn't apparent at the start, but the moment the family left their ideal life in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, Judy also left behind her happy childhood. Life was about to change for her at only 4 years old. Assuming the vastly different climate of Los Angeles would be better for Judy's health, proved to be not the case. She fell terrifyingly ill again with another mysterious fever and dehydration, just as she had when she was a year old. She became very sick not long after the family settled in Lancaster, and would have to spend yet another month in the hospital in Los Angeles as doctors nursed her back to health, not knowing if she would survive once again. Judy didn't remember her first experience being gravely ill and hospitalized for weeks, but she would remember this time when she was 5 years old. Her health was so delicate. The Gums operated the theater in Lancaster, California for about 6 years. During their time there, Ethel and Frank's relationship deteriorated, and they began to fight a lot, which really frightened the girls. And with every late-night fight, Ethel would tear Judy out of bed, load her into the car, and drive fast and furious down desert and mountain roads for hours. Judy began fearing bedtime because she never knew if that night would be one of the nights that she was ripped out of bed and brought along for a terrifying car ride. Between the turmoil in the marriage and the fact that Ethel never really felt like they were accepted in Lancaster as they had been in Grand Rapids, Ethel started putting all of her attention onto her 3 daughters and the hopeful career in entertainment that she wanted for them. Her way out. She enrolled them in dance school, and she played piano there in exchange for a discount. And on top of that, the girls were expected to practice singing for at least 1 hour every single day. Ethel eventually enrolled them in a better dance school in Los Angeles, which was a long ways away. So this is how they would spend most weekends. The new dance school was one of the most sought after for children, Mrs. Meglin's School of the Dance, which had turned out stars like Shirley Temple. It was a rigorous routine for the girls. They would attend school in Lancaster all week, then dance and singing lessons every evening, and then Ethel and the girls would leave at 7 o'clock a.m. every Saturday morning to head to the city, a bumpy 3-hour drive away. They would have dance lessons and auditions all day Saturday and all day Sunday until making the long drive back to Lancaster. Then up bright and early for school the next day to do it all again on repeat. Ethel was determined to make the Gum sisters into superstars. If not all of them, at least the adorable youngest daughter, Baby, the future Judy Garland. And eventually, Ethel did allow the older two girls to step back a bit on the weekends. But not Judy. She drug her into audition after audition at all the film studios. Something little Judy despised. She just wanted to be a kid. But her mother didn't allow her to do the things that the other children in Lancaster were doing. And Ethel was such a strict and rigid presence that the other children and their parents didn't want to be around her anyways. A woman named Irma Story, who had known Judy as a child, said, quote, "Everybody wanted to be Babe's friend, but we didn't want to be bossed by her mother. I wouldn't say that I disliked Mrs. Gum, but I was glad she wasn't my mother." End quote. Frank was overflowing with love for Judy, and Ethel was quickly becoming a determined stage mother. Author Gerald Clarke summed it up nicely in his biography, Get Happy. He wrote, quote, "If Frank's love was like the Niagara, unending and unstoppable, Ethel's could be compared to the flow that comes out of a faucet, a meager stream that she could turn on and turn off." End quote. Movie roles for Judy weren't quite coming yet, but Ethel was able to book professional gigs for the Gum sisters. Their first engagement rolling in $10 a week. That would be $190 today. With more and more exposure, word spread more and more about the Gum sisters. Most notably, the little 6-year-old with the powerful singing voice that blew everyone away. Judy was soon dubbed Little Miss Leather Lungs. She had that adult, strong Judy Garland voice even as a little girl. Judy was the star of the trio with her stunning solos, which was just fine for her sisters because they wanted as little pressure put on them as possible. They were ready to get out of show business altogether. And if their adorable little sister with the voice of an angel could hold the whole show, well, that would work out great for them. Although Judy had loved that first taste of performing in front of an audience when she was a toddler, when it became pushed on her and the expectations became so intense for such a young child, that high from an audience applause didn't seem to hold that same magic anymore. Judy later recalled of her life as a child performer, quote, "They'd wind me up to sing and then put me back in the closet when they were finished with me." End quote. Not only were the Gum sisters regularly performing at the family's theater, and whatever other engagements Ethel could get them booked at, but little Judy was expected to sing pretty much everywhere they went. She was their little sideshow. Ethel's eyes were still set on the movies, though. She had to get Judy into the movies. So every Saturday, visits to all the Hollywood movie studios completely replaced the weekend dance classes in the city. Judy was thrilled when her mother allowed her to start bringing a friend to these long days of auditions. It was unlike Ethel to allow such a luxury. But the girls soon figured out why when they would be left alone to play outside after most of the auditions, while Ethel had long, private meetings with this or that studio exec. Sometimes for a few hours. Judy later came to the conclusion that her mother must have been trading sexual favors for the potential opportunity of her child to be in the movies. Judy hated these auditions, not only for what her mother was allegedly doing or for being left alone, but because her performances didn't earn her applause or positive feedback or even a smile. She would sing her heart out and just be stared at with stern, serious faces by studio execs. She dreaded these auditions, but they were very important to Ethel. Each passing year of Judy's childhood marked more pressure put upon her in her mother's pursuit of making her a star. Ethel worked her harder and harder and did everything she could to open the doors needed to get Judy noticed. In order to keep Judy going through the rigorous lessons and rehearsals, Ethel began a practice that she'd used with the older girls for years. Before Judy was even 10 years old, her mother began giving her uppers to keep her up and keep her going, and then downers to help her sleep at night. The thing that caused Judy Garland so much pain and struggle throughout her life, and ultimately cut her life decades short. Her lifelong battle against substance abuse. It all began with her mother before she was even 10 years old. If that isn't bad enough, Ethel was also a master at gaslighting and manipulation, creating confusion and fear in her youngest child. On those late nights when she would pull Judy from bed to run away from home, those arguments with Frank often caused by her overworking of Judy. If Judy protested that she didn't want to leave her home or her father, Ethel would cry to the young girl, "You don't love your mother." Or on trips into Los Angeles with just Ethel and Judy, if Judy did any small thing to upset her mother, Ethel would leave Judy all alone for hours in their hotel room in order to teach her a lesson. And when she returned, Judy would cry her apologies, to which her mother would tell her she may not be as lucky next time. Next time, she might not return at all. This was Judy's childhood with her controlling and manipulative mother in a nutshell. Ethel didn't help matters at home when she started having an affair. And to make the situation even worse was the fact that the man was the husband of her best friend, a man named Will Gilmore. The Gilmores were the Gums' very best friends in Lancaster. They did almost everything together, and their children were all very close as well. Mrs. Gilmore, Laura, sadly suffered a stroke which she didn't fully recover from that left her unable to walk. Ethel and Will took this as an opportunity to spend more time alone together. And during one of these times alone together in an outbuilding on the Gilmore property, Judy found her mother and Mr. Gilmore during a very inopportune moment while the kids were playing hide and seek. Judy literally walked in on her mother being intimate with a man who was not her father. A man who was as far opposite her father as could be. He was stern and mean to her father's kind and calm. Judy despised him, and after that horrifying event, she despised him even more, and lost a lot of trust and respect for her mother. Let's shift our focus over to Frank Gum, Judy's father. He may have been a saint to Judy, but by many accounts, he was far from. Yes, he was a loving father who adored his daughters, but that problem he had back in Minnesota, the inappropriate behavior with teenage boys, it was a problem he still held. Frank Gum used his position as theater owner to assault the teenage boys who worked for him. It went from unwanted pats on the rear as they walked by to much, much more disturbing things in the back row of the theater as films rolled. It went beyond teenage employees, too. He would offer free admission to local teenage boys in exchange for sexual favors. It seems like every teenage boy in town knew this about Frank, but they all, of course, stopped short of telling their parents or teachers. I want to say I got this information from Gerald Clarke's book, Get Happy, but I mostly see Frank Gum referred to as closeted gay, which may very well be the case, and I am sad for him if he wasn't able to live the life that maybe he wanted to live as a gay man. But the fact remains that Frank was manipulating underage boys for sexual acts, and that is definitely not okay. This about her father is something that Judy always contested. She adored her father and just couldn't accept the horror of that reality. Frank had always been the one constant, nurturing presence in Judy's life. The idea of accepting these horrific accounts as truth was something she just couldn't do. She needed to hang on to that perfect image of him. She simply couldn't lose the one nurturing figure in her life, the one person she thought would always protect her, that could do no wrong. Let's take a breath here. Hearing all of these things about Judy Garland's childhood, it's a lot of puzzle pieces, isn't it? The demons of her later life begin to make a little more sense when you get the full picture of her life's foundation. She likely could have made it through the betrayals of her mother and father, It would have definitely left some emotional scarring. But developing and growing through those traumas was made all the more difficult due to the high expectations and rigorous training pushed upon her to be a star. She endured a life no child should have to live. Big changes came to Judy's life in 1933. During the summer she turned 11 years old, Ethel's dreams came true when she was able to break free from Lancaster and finally make the move to Los Angeles. She had been banking on the Gum sisters, or at least Judy, making it big so she had a reason to live in LA and have a paycheck to support that life. But she had found herself stuck with Frank in Lancaster since the theater was the only lucrative venture making any real money. But in early 1933, Ethel got a job in Los Angeles as a singing teacher and leader of a small orchestra. The girl stayed in Lancaster to finish up the school year, Mary Jane finishing school for good as she was graduating from high school that year. That summer, Ethel returned to Lancaster to bring her 3 daughters to their new life in Los Angeles. But there would be no time to settle into that new life, and there would be no time to establish a routine. The very next day after they arrived at their new home in LA, Ethel had the girls on a boat to San Francisco for a week-long engagement. And then, as soon as they returned to LA, she had them booked for back-to-back gigs in Long Beach, Hollywood, and downtown LA. A new school year began in the fall of 1933 for 11-year-old Judy. She had to start at a new school surrounded by all new people. She wasn't attending a typical public school, though. Her mother enrolled both her and 16-year-old sister Virginia in the Lawler School for Professional Children, which was situated directly next to the Central Casting Office on Hollywood Boulevard. As you could probably assume from the name of the school, grooming children for a life as a professional actor was the number one priority. And if they had time for academics, that was second priority. Classes were taught only in the mornings, while afternoons were left free for children to attend auditions and rehearsals. Attendance wasn't mandatory or punishable because the school wanted children to have the freedom to work. Judy met another student on her very first day that would soon become a very prominent figure in her professional life. 13-year-old Mickey Rooney, who was already a well-known child actor from the Mickey Maguire series of short films. On top of settling into the new structure of school, new people, and a heightened emphasis on auditions and work and becoming a star, Judy was struggling because she really missed her father. Yes, we know that he was a sexually abusive man and allegedly did terrible things to vulnerable young men and boys. In no world would I ever excuse behavior like that. But to Judy, he was her father and the person she loved more than anyone else in the world. And she missed him. She missed him in her everyday life. Ethel's expectations of her daughters amplified in early 1934 when she lost her job after just 1 year, a result of the Great Depression. At this point, a somewhat consistent schedule at school became a mostly distant past as Ethel booked the Gum sisters on a busy tour of Northern California and the Pacific Northwest. And right after that, Chicago and New York, working their way east with gigs along the way. Frank tried to make it to his daughter's West Coast performances as often as he could, but it was hard to get away from the theater. When he could, he sometimes traveled long distances to see them, and he was always the most exuberant person in the audience. He was very proud of his girls, and they were always very happy to see him. But once they headed east, they were on their own, which he didn't really approve of, but he was no match for the determined Ethel. Judy later recalled the heartbreak of being separated from her father while being shuffled from engagement to engagement as a child. She said, quote, "It's hard to explain, but all the times I had to leave him, I just pretended he wasn't there. Because if I'd thought about him being there, I'd have been too full of longing." End quote. Ethel thought for sure that this big U.S. tour would be the exposure that would get her daughters, or at least Judy, discovered. It would be the tour that would change their lives. But the reality of it was much different for most of their 4 months away. They were barely making enough to sustain. Then they met another budding sister group while in Chicago, the Andrews Sisters. And it was through them that they finally got the boost Ethel was hoping for. Chicago's Oriental Theater was in search of another girls' trio, and the Andrews Sisters recommended the Gum Sisters. George Jessel, the master of ceremonies, was very impressed with their audition, but mostly with just one of them, Judy. He described the strong, mature-sounding voice he heard coming out of 12-year-old Judy Garland's voice like a woman carrying a torch for Valentino. He hired the trio, but he said that name of Gum had to go. He suggested the last name of a good friend of his, theater critic Robert Garland. So, the Gum Sisters became the Garland Sisters as they debuted at Chicago's Oriental Theater on August 17, 1934, during the World's Fair, to great delight of their audience. And with that, Ethel's dreams were starting to come true. The Garland Sisters were on the map. Once home in Los Angeles after their long 4-month U.S. tour, things were much different. The Gum Sisters had transformed into the Garland Sisters along the way, and along with the new name came a newfound interest in them from local entertainment venues. They instantly got booked at prominent venues like Grauman's Chinese Theater, the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, and the Orpheum Theater. But what Ethel still really wanted for her youngest daughter was for her to be a movie star. Even after the Garland Sisters became more known through their live performances, and people were raving about Judy's remarkable singing voice, none of the movie studios were interested. They just didn't quite know what to do with her. Judy was about to turn 13 years old, and that was just an awkward age for films then. No longer a cute little girl, but not quite a teenage beauty. Or a beauty at all, as far as most studio execs were concerned. The studios hadn't been interested in her when she was younger anyways. Magical singing voice or not, the studios just didn't have a vehicle for her. "What can we do with a Huckleberry Finn?" said a studio exec from Columbia Pictures. Ethel wasn't about to give up, though. She knew her daughter was a star. Just as Ethel had found the ladder to fame she'd been so desperately seeking with her daughter's act, Frank was having some serious trouble up in Lancaster. His days of getting away with his predatory behavior against teenage boys was finally beginning to come to light as these acts became known to a couple of adults in town. And then more adults. And then the whole town. He'd gotten sloppy when his family moved away and he didn't have to hide as much. Pretty much overnight, parents throughout town forbid their children from patronizing the Valley Theater. And they, of course, weren't seeing movies there themselves either. And then Frank received an eviction notice from the man who owned the building that housed the theater. He had no interest in keeping a man with such a reputation, a man who was such a danger to the community, under lease in his building. Frank's sexual abuse of the boys of Lancaster had led to his complete downfall. He's lucky he didn't get arrested or shot by a furious father. He got off lucky. He was run out of town, and Ethel welcomed him to join the family in Los Angeles. Judy was now 13 years old, and she was delighted to have her father back, likely not knowing why she had her father back. But her father didn't return to his little baby Gum. She was now a Garland sister, and she didn't want to be called Baby anymore, or Babe, or her given name of Frances. She was growing up, and she was going to be a star, whether she wanted to or not. Her mother assured her of that. If that was really her fate, she needed a star's name, a grown-up star's name. So she chose one for herself, inspired by a hit song by Hoagy Carmichael. And from that point on, she would only answer to her new star name, Judy Garland. And just as it happened when the trio changed their name from the Gum Sisters to the Garland Sisters, The simple changing of her name became the magic potion that wondrously brought success. After years of her mother's attempts at getting her youngest daughter inside the gates of the big Hollywood film studios, their time was finally about to come. Judy Garland was about to get inside those gates. Not just any Hollywood studio gates. Judy was invited inside the Hollywood studio gates. MGM, the best of the best. MGM in 1935 had Clarke Gable. They had Greta Garbo. They had Joan Crawford. They had Jean Harlow. They had the Marx Brothers. They had more stars than there are in heaven, as they proudly boasted. And on September 27th, 1935, they had Judy Garland. This is where I'm going to leave off with for this week, as we leave Frances Baby Gum behind and prepare for our journey into stardom with Judy Garland. Stardom, pain, heartbreak, struggles, and I'd like to think at least a little joy. I'll be back next week for another journey through Judy Garland's story. Do you want some fabulous bonus content while you await the next installment of Judy Garland's story? Patreon is the place to find it. We're talking riveting bonus episodes, movie of the month episodes, and my favorite, the cocktail party episodes, where I share a vintage cocktail recipe and some juicy old Hollywood celebrity gossip. And this month on the cocktail party is all about Judy Garland. There's lots of great stuff over there on Patreon, and more being added all the time. And you'll be saving the world by supporting this little independent podcast. Saving my world, at least. Patreon.com/Stars of the Golden Age podcast. You can find a link in the show notes. Also, join us on social media. You can find Stars of the Golden Age on Instagram, Facebook, and Threads. Come join us and see how terrible I am at posting things. But I'm trying to improve. Thank you so much for listening. Please don't forget to come back next week. Reach for the positive in every day, be kind to everyone you encounter, and have a great rest of your week. I appreciate you all so much. For this episode, I used the book Get Happy, The Life and Career of Judy Garland by Gerald Clarke. And I also used the book Judy by Gerald Frank. And then I used a lot of wonderful information I acquired at the Judy Garland Museum and Childhood Home in Grand Rapids, Minnesota.
If you're a podcast host, listen up, this one's for you. My name is Allie Jackson. I'm the host of Finding Mr. Height, a dating and relationship podcast that I've been doing for 4 years now, sharing my positive and practical approach to dating that's built on my own life experience. And I wanted to share another experience that I've had, my secret behind monetizing my show. It's called Red Circle, and I was just telling my colleague about how much I love their platform. With Red Circle, not only am I getting a seamless hosting experience, but I also love the support I receive in ad sales. It's not just typical ad sales either. It's targeted opportunities based on my show and my life. And the platform is super simple. You just set your preferences and Red Circle matches you with sponsors that align with your show. You can vet every opportunity and their platform gives you great analytics. More recently too, my Red Circle team has brought me opportunities outside of my podcast on social media to really augment the podcast partnerships, bring them full circle. I just can't recommend them enough. If you want to give it a try, go to redcircle.com to get your free trial. That's redcircle.com for a free trial.